I never thought a snowstorm in Colorado Springs would lead to me becoming the most talked about person in Meadowbrook Heights. But here we are. It started on a Tuesday morning in January when I woke up to 3 feet of fresh powder covering everything in sight. The kind of snow that makes the news and shuts down half the city. I'm Ethan Bradley, and I run a small landscaping and snow removal business that keeps me busy enough to pay the bills and then some. That morning, my phone was already blowing up with calls from commercial clients desperate to get their parking lots cleared before the morning rush turned into complete chaos. I grabbed my coffee, threw on my insulated coveralls, and headed out to fire up Big Blue, my trusty Bobcat S650. She's a beauty, that machine. Bought her used 3 years ago and she's never let me down. The engine roared to life in the freezing air, and I started making my way through my client list, pushing mountains of snow into neat piles, creating pathways through the winter chaos. By noon, I'd cleared 6 commercial lots and was heading back through my neighborhood to grab lunch and warm up before tackling the afternoon jobs. That's when I saw her standing in my driveway. Brenda Carmichael, the president of the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association, and quite possibly the most entitled person I'd ever met in my 32 years of life. She was bundled up in what looked like a designer ski jacket that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, waving her arms at me like she was trying to flag down a helicopter. I slowed the Bobcat and lowered the bucket before climbing out. "Ethan, finally. I've been waiting for you for 20 minutes, she shouted over the engine noise. I killed the engine. "Brenda, what can I do for you? You can start by clearing my driveway," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "I have an appointment at the salon at 2 and I can't get my Mercedes out." I blinked at her. "I'm sorry, what? Your machine. I need you to use it to clear my driveway. I've seen you do it for other people in the neighborhood." "Yeah, for clients who pay me. I run a business, Brenda." She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be ridiculous. We live in the same neighborhood. Neighbors help neighbors. That's what community is all about." I felt my jaw tighten. Community is great. My business pays my bills. "If you want me to clear your driveway, I charge $200 for residential properties this size with this much snow." Her face went red. Actually red, which was impressive given how cold it was. $200. That's highway robbery. I could hire someone for $50. "Then hire someone for $50, I said calmly. "But you'll be waiting a while. Every snow removal company in the city is booked solid today." "I am the president of this HOA, she said, pulling herself up to her full height, which was maybe 5'4". "I could make things very difficult for you if you don't cooperate." And there it was. The threat I'd been waiting for since the moment I saw her standing in my driveway. Brenda had been HOA president for 2 years, and in that time, she'd made life miserable for at least a dozen homeowners over the pettiest violations imaginable. Wrong shade of beige on a mailbox, garden gnome too tall, Christmas lights up past December 26th. "Is that right?" I said. "That's absolutely right. We have very strict rules in this neighborhood about commercial vehicles being parked in residential driveways. I could fine you every single day you park that thing here." I looked at Big Blue, sitting in my driveway where she'd been parked for 3 years without issue. "That's a work truck, Brenda. Half the people in this neighborhood park work vehicles in their driveways, but they don't have loud, obnoxious construction equipment like yours. So this is about revenge because I won't do free work for you. This is about you being a good neighbor and following community standards," she snapped. "Now are you going to clear my driveway or not?" I thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. "No, I'm not." Her eyes went wide. "Fine. Then you'll be receiving a fine in the mail, multiple fines actually." I'm going to go through every single inch of your property and find every violation I can." She stormed off, her boots crunching through the snow, slipping once and catching herself on a mailbox. My mailbox, actually. She shot me a glare like it was somehow my fault before marching toward her house 3 doors down. I stood there in the cold, watching her go, and felt something shift in my chest. Not anger exactly. More like a calm certainty that I was about to stop being the nice guy who let people walk all over him. I climbed back into the Bobcat and drove it into my garage. Then I went inside, made myself a sandwich, and started going through the HOA bylaws on my laptop. If Brenda wanted to play the rules game, I was going to make sure I knew every single rule better than she did. The first fine arrived 2 days later. $500 for commercial vehicle storage in violation of community standards. The letter was typed on official HOA letterhead and signed by Brenda in flowing script. It cited Section 7.3 of the HOA bylaws, which I'd already read 3 times. I called my neighbor Mike Henderson, who'd lived in Meadowbrook Heights for 15 years and served on the HOA board before Brenda took over. He came over that evening with a bottle of beer and a sympathetic expression. "She's targeting you," he said, reading the letter. "This section has been on the books since the neighborhood was built, but nobody's enforced it in decades. I parked a company van in my driveway for 10 years when I worked for the cable company." "Can she actually make this stick?" I asked. Mike shrugged. "Technically, maybe. But she'd have to enforce it equally against everyone, and she's not going to do that. My guess is she's betting you'll just pay the fine or move your equipment to avoid the hassle." "What if I fight it?" "Then you request a hearing with the full HOA board. There are 5 members including Brenda. You present your case, they vote on whether the fine stands. And they'll vote however Brenda tells them to. Probably. 3 of them are her friends. One of them, Dorothy Phelps, might listen to reason. She's fair-minded." I thought about it while Mike finished his beer. Fighting felt like the right move, even if it was a long shot. Principle mattered. More than that, I couldn't let Brenda think she could bully people whenever she wanted something. "How do I request a hearing?" I asked. Mike grinned. "That's my boy. I'll email you the procedure." The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at the community clubhouse. In the meantime, 2 more fines arrived. One for a crack in my driveway that apparently violated maintenance standards. Another for having my trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day, even though I'd brought them in within the required 4-hour window. That fine was for $200, $700 in total, for absolutely nothing. I spent the week documenting everything. I took photos of every commercial vehicle parked in driveways throughout the neighborhood. I found 8, including a plumbing van, 2 contractor trucks, and what looked like a delivery vehicle. I compiled a list of maintenance issues on other properties that were identical to or worse than my driveway crack. I reviewed the HOA bylaws until I could recite the relevant sections from memory. Thursday evening was cold and clear. I arrived at the clubhouse 15 minutes early and found about 20 other homeowners already there. Word had gotten around about what was happening, and apparently people were interested. Mike caught my eye and gave me a thumbs up from the back row. I sat in the front and waited. Brenda arrived exactly on time, flanked by the other board members. She looked like she was going to a country club event rather than an HOA hearing, wearing a cream-colored sweater and expensive-looking jewelry. The other board members took their seats at a long table facing the rows of chairs where residents sat. "This hearing will come to order," Brenda announced. "We're here to address the appeals filed by Ethan Bradley regarding 3 violations and associated fines." "Ethan, You have 15 minutes to present your case. I stood up and walked to the small podium set up facing the board. I'd printed copies of everything for each board member, which I distributed before starting. "Thanks for your time," I said. "I'm appealing these fines because they're being selectively enforced as retaliation for my refusal to provide free services to Mrs. Carmichael." On Tuesday, January 14th, Mrs. Carmichael demanded that I clear her driveway with my business equipment at no charge. When I declined and offered to do the work for my standard rate, she explicitly threatened to fine me using her position as HOA president. These fines arrived within the following 3 days. Brenda's face went tight. "That's a complete fabrication." "I'm not finished," I said calmly. The first fine cites commercial vehicle storage. As you can see in the photos I've provided, there are currently 8 other commercial vehicles regularly parked in residential driveways throughout Meadowbrook Heights. None of those homeowners have received fines. The second fine cites a crack in my driveway. The photos show 17 other properties with similar or more extensive driveway damage. None have been fined. The third fine claims my trash cans were visible from the street on a non-collection day. But I have a timestamp stamped photo from my security camera showing they were returned to my garage within 3 hours of collection, which is well within the 4-hour window specified in Section 9.2. I looked at each board member in turn. These fines are not about maintaining community standards. They're about one person abusing their authority for personal revenge. The bylaws clearly state that rules must be enforced equally and fairly. That's not happening here. Brenda stood up. "This is outrageous. I have never abused my authority. Ethan is simply upset about being held accountable for violating multiple community standards." "Then why haven't you fined anyone else for identical violations?" I asked. "We address violations as they come to our attention." "So all of these violations came to your attention in the 3 days after I refused to clear your driveway for free. What a coincidence." The room was dead silent. I could see a few people in the audience nodding. One of the board members, an older woman I assumed was Dorothy Phelps, was studying the photos I'd provided with a frown. Brenda's voice went cold. "Your time is up, Ethan. Please sit down." I gathered my materials and returned to my seat. Brenda spent the next 10 minutes arguing about the importance of maintaining standards and respecting the authority of the board. She didn't address any of my evidence directly. When she finished, Dorothy raised her hand. "I have some concerns about the selective enforcement issue Ethan raised." "These photos are pretty compelling." "Those will all be addressed in due course," Brenda said quickly. "We have to handle violations systematically." "But you handled 3 of Ethan's violations within 3 days of each other," Dorothy pointed out. "That seems pretty fast." Another board member, a man named Richard Sterling, cleared his throat. "I think we should table this and review the enforcement patterns more carefully. Something does seem off." Brenda looked like she'd been slapped. "We are not tabling anything. We have clear violations and clear evidence." "All in favor of upholding the fines?" She raised her hand. So did 2 other board members, friends of hers whose names I didn't catch. Richard and Dorothy kept their hands down. "The motion passes 3-2, Brenda announced. "The fines stand. This hearing is adjourned." I felt my hands curl into fists, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd known this was likely, but it still stung. $700 because I wouldn't be someone's free labor. People started filing out. Several stopped to pat my shoulder or tell me they thought the ruling was unfair. Mike walked out with me. "That was some grade of bullshit," he muttered. "But you put up a good fight. Lot of good it did me." "You planted seeds." Dorothy and Richard both saw through Brenda's act. That matters. I drove home feeling hollow. $700 wasn't going to bankrupt me, but it was the principle, the injustice of it. I parked in my garage and sat in my truck for a long moment, staring at nothing. Then I noticed the letter taped to my front door, another violation notice. This one cited my mailbox for being insufficiently maintained and showing signs of weather damage and deterioration inconsistent with community aesthetic standards. Fine amount, $300. Something snapped. I walked back to my garage, climbed into Big Blue, and fired her up. It was 8:30 at night and fully dark, but I had work lights on the Bobcat. I flipped them on and drove slowly down the street toward Brenda's house. Her mailbox stood at the end of her driveway, a fancy thing made to look like a miniature version of her house, complete with decorative shutters and a copper roof. It probably cost $500. I stopped the Bobcat and sat there idling, staring at that mailbox. My rational brain was screaming at me to turn around and go home, that this would only make things worse. That revenge wasn't the answer. But the other part of my brain, the part that was tired of being pushed around and punished for standing up for myself, had different ideas. I lowered the bucket and gave it some gas. The mailbox never stood a chance. The bucket caught it at the base and sent it flying into Brenda's snow-covered lawn, where it landed with a satisfying thump. But I wasn't done. I scooped up a massive load of snow from the pile at the edge of her driveway and deposited it right where the mailbox had been, burying the broken post and creating a mountain of white that had to be 4 feet high. Then I scooped up another bucket load and dumped it on top of the mailbox itself, completely covering the decorative little house until it disappeared under the snow. The whole thing took maybe 90 seconds. Then I drove the Bobcat back to my garage, parked it, went inside and poured myself a bourbon. My hands were shaking. Not from fear exactly, more from the adrenaline rush of finally doing something instead of just taking it. I knew there would be consequences. I knew Brenda would lose her mind. But in that moment, sitting in my living room with my drink, I felt better than I had in days. I slept surprisingly well that night. The banging on my door started at 6:30 in the morning. I stumbled out of bed, pulled on a robe, and opened the door to find Brenda standing there with her phone out, taking pictures of me. "You vandalized my property," she shrieked. "Good morning to you too," I said. "Don't play games with me. I know it was you. You destroyed my mailbox." "I don't know what you're talking about. There are tire tracks from your driveway to mine. I'm calling the police." "You do that," I said, and closed the door in her face. She kept banging for another minute, then I heard her stomping away, already yelling into her phone. I made coffee and waited. The police arrived about 45 minutes later. A single officer in a Colorado Springs Police Department cruiser. I met him at the door before he could knock. "Morning, officer. I'm guessing this is about Brenda Carmichael's mailbox." The officer, whose name tag Reed Martinez, looked tired. "That's right. She filed a vandalism report. She claims you destroyed her mailbox with construction equipment last night around 8:30. Did she see me do it?" "She says she didn't witness it directly, but she saw tire tracks and heard equipment running around that time." "Officer Martinez, I've been having some issues with Mrs. Carmichael lately. She's the HOA president and she's been issuing me questionable fines after I refuse to do free work for her. I think she's looking for any reason to cause me trouble." Martinez nodded slowly. "She mentioned you had conflicts. I'm not saying I had anything to do with her mailbox, but if I did, hypothetically, do mailboxes fall under vandalism laws, or is there some other statute I should be aware of?" The officer's mouth twitched like he was fighting a smile. "Technically, damaging a mailbox is a federal offense since it's considered federal property. But in practice, for something like this, It's usually handled as misdemeanor criminal mischief if there's evidence of who did it. And is there evidence? There are tire tracks, but they're not exactly unique. Could have come from any piece of equipment. Martinez looked at me for a long moment. Look, off the record, I've responded to calls in this neighborhood before. Mrs. Carmichael tends to overreact to things. But I still need to file a report and investigate properly. Do you have any video surveillance that might have captured your driveway or the street last night? I have a camera on my front door, but it doesn't point toward the street. What about your Bobcat? Does it have any identifiable damage that might match marks on the mailbox? I haven't noticed any. Martinez nodded again. Okay, I'm going to check out the scene and write up my report. If any evidence points definitively to you, we'll be in touch. Otherwise, Mrs. Carmichael will need to file an insurance claim for the mailbox. Thanks for being reasonable about this, officer. Just doing my job. Have a good day, Mr. Bradley. He left, and I watched from my window as he spent about 20 minutes at Brenda's house, taking photos and measurements. Brenda stood there the whole time, gesticulating wildly. Martinez maintained his professional demeanor throughout, nodding and taking notes. After he left, I got dressed and headed to my first job of the day. My phone rang while I was loading equipment into my truck. It was Dorothy Phelps from the HOA board. Ethan, this is Dorothy. I'm calling about the incident with Brenda's mailbox. My stomach dropped. What about it? She's calling an emergency board meeting for tonight. She wants to issue a fine and possibly pursue legal action against you for vandalism on HOA property. The mailbox is on her property, not HOA property. She's claiming it affects the community aesthetic and represents destruction of property within HOA boundaries. Look, between you and me, I think she's reaching. But she's got Carol and Janet wrapped around her finger, so she'll have the votes to do whatever she wants unless Richard and I can talk sense into them. I appreciate the heads up. Did you do it? Dorothy asked bluntly. I hesitated. Dorothy, I don't think I should answer that question. She sighed. That's what I thought. Listen, I've lived in this neighborhood for 20 years. I've seen 5 different HOA presidents come and go. Brenda is by far the worst. She's vindictive and petty, and she abuses her authority constantly. But you can't fight her by destroying property, Ethan. That makes you the bad guy. You're right, I said. I let my frustration get the better of me, so you did do it. I didn't say that. Dorothy laughed despite herself. You're a piece of work. Okay. Come to the meeting tonight if you want to defend yourself. 7 p.m. at the clubhouse, but be prepared for Brenda to throw the book at you. Thanks for the warning. I spent the day working, pushing the situation to the back of my mind while I focused on clearing parking lots and driveways for actual paying customers. By the time evening rolled around, I'd made enough to cover Brenda's original fines twice over, which helped my mood considerably. The emergency board meeting had an even bigger crowd than the first hearing. Apparently destroying an HOA president's mailbox was hot gossip in Meadowbrook Heights. I arrived to find the clubhouse packed, with people standing along the walls because all the chairs were full. Brenda looked like she was ready for war. She dressed in a severe black pantsuit and had her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She called the meeting to order by literally banging a gavel on the table, which seemed excessive. We're here to address the criminal vandalism committed against my property by Ethan Bradley, she announced. Last night, he used his construction equipment to deliberately destroy my mailbox and bury it under snow. This is completely unacceptable and represents a serious threat to our community's safety and standards. I raised my hand. Do you have evidence I did this? I have tire tracks leading from your driveway to mine. Tire tracks that could have come from any vehicle or equipment. The police investigated and apparently didn't find enough evidence to charge me with anything. That doesn't mean you didn't do it. Actually, in America, that's kind of exactly what it means. Innocent until proven guilty, the crowd murmured. Some people were clearly on my side. Others looked scandalized that I'd talk back to the HOA president. Brenda's face went red. Your attitude proves your guilt. A respectful, innocent person would be apologizing for any confusion and offering to help replace the mailbox. Why would I offer to replace something I didn't break? Because you're a member of this community and you should care about your neighbors. Like you cared about me when you issued $700 in retaliatory fines. That stopped her cold. She opened and closed her mouth a few times before finding her voice. Those fines were legitimate. According to a vote you forced through by manipulating the board, Dorothy and Richard both had concerns. Dorothy shifted in her seat. Richard looked uncomfortable. The other two board members, Carol and Janet, just glared at me like I'd insulted their best friend, which I suppose I had. Brenda shuffled her papers. The board is voting tonight on a special assessment fine of $2,000 for property destruction and another $1,000 for creating a safety hazard with improper snow placement. $3,000, I said. For a mailbox I haven't been proven to have touched, for pattern of disruptive behavior and disrespect for community standards. This is insane. Dorothy raised her hand. I have to agree with Ethan. We can't fine someone $3,000 without actual proof they did anything wrong. The police didn't charge him. We have no video evidence. All we have is Brenda's assumption. She saw the tire tracks, Janet protested. Tire tracks aren't proof, Richard added. They're circumstantial at best. Brenda looked panicked. She was losing control of the meeting. Fine. Then we'll fine him for the other violations, the ones he never paid. He's appealing those, Dorothy said. The appeal was denied, because you pushed through a vote before we could properly review the evidence. I move to reopen those appeals and conduct a proper investigation into whether rules are being enforced fairly across the community. Second, Richard said immediately. Brenda's face went from red to purple. You can't do this. Actually, we can, Dorothy said calmly. That's how the board works. We vote on things. All in favor of reopening the appeals, Dorothy and Richard raised their hands. Carol and Janet kept theirs down. Brenda looked like she was going to explode. We have a 2-2 tie, Dorothy said. Brenda, as president, you cast the deciding vote. The room waited. Brenda clearly wanted to vote no, but she just spent 20 minutes ranting about the importance of proper procedure and evidence. If she voted against her own standards, she'd look like a hypocrite in front of 40 neighbors. This is ridiculous, she muttered. Fine. Yes. We'll reopen the appeals, but I want it on record that I believe Ethan Bradley is guilty of vandalism and should be held accountable. Noted, Dorothy said. Now, for the new fines related to the mailbox incident. All in favor. Only Carol and Janet raised their hands. The motion fails. No fines will be assessed at this time. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was something. Brenda gathered her papers with shaking hands and adjourned the meeting without another word. She stormed out of the clubhouse, leaving the other board members to awkwardly chat with residents. Dorothy found me on my way out. You got lucky tonight. I know, thank you for speaking up. Don't thank me yet. Brenda's not going to let this go. She's going to be watching you like a hawk, waiting for any excuse to come after you again. So what do I do? Follow every rule perfectly. Give her nothing to work with. And maybe, just maybe, consider apologizing for the mailbox even if you don't admit guilt. Extend an olive branch. I thought about it while walking to my truck. The rational part of my brain knew Dorothy was right. The smart move was to de-escalate, be the bigger person, move on. But I'd spent too many years being the bigger person with people like Brenda. Always backing down, always apologizing, always making myself smaller to avoid conflict. I was done with that. Over the next week, I made sure my property was absolutely perfect. I patched the crack in my driveway with cold mix asphalt. I parked Big Blue in my garage instead of the driveway. I brought my trash cans in within 30 minutes of collection. I even trimmed some bushes that were starting to look a little overgrown. Brenda drove past my house at least 3 times a day, slowing down to inspect everything. I waved at her each time. She never waved back. The reopened appeal hearing happened the following Tuesday. This time, Dorothy had done her homework. She'd driven through the entire neighborhood documenting every violation identical to the ones I'd been fined for. She'd compiled a report showing that in the past 3 years, Brenda had issued fines to 12 different homeowners, and in every single case, it had been someone who'd had some kind of conflict with her personally. One guy had complained about her dog barking, fined for lawn maintenance. Another had asked her to stop parking in front of his house during her book club meetings, fined for leaving his garage door open. A woman had declined to donate to Brenda's favorite charity, fined for holiday decorations that supposedly violated the time limits, even though half the neighborhood had identical decorations up for the same period. The pattern was damning. The board voted 4-1 to rescind all my fines, with only Brenda voting against. They also voted to implement new oversight procedures, requiring any fines over $200 to be approved by at least 3 board members. Brenda went silent and cold. She didn't scream or threaten, just sat there with her lips pressed into a thin line, staring at the wall. After the meeting, Richard pulled me aside. "Watch yourself. I've seen her like this before. She's planning something." "Let her plan," I said. "I haven't done anything wrong." That was Thursday. On Friday morning, I woke up to find all 4 of my truck tires slashed. I stood in my driveway in my pajamas and winter coat, staring at the damage. Each tire had a clean cut on the sidewall, too precise to be accidental. Someone had done this deliberately. I called the police and got Officer Martinez again. "You're having a rough month," he said, photographing the tires. "That's one way to put it. Any idea who might have done this?" "Brenda Carmichael." Martinez stopped photographing. "That's a serious accusation. I'm not saying she did it personally, but she's been escalating for weeks. This is the next logical step. Do you have any evidence?" "No." Cameras point at my truck. "But come on, officer, you know what's going on here." Martinez sighed. "What I know is that I need evidence to pursue charges. Without video or witnesses, this is just going to be a report for your insurance. I can go talk to Mrs. Carmichael, but unless she confesses or I find a knife in her garage with rubber marks on it, there's nothing I can do. So she gets away with it." "I didn't say that. I said I need evidence. If you want to catch her, you need cameras. Good ones." I spent the afternoon installing a new security system. 6 cameras covering every angle of my property with cloud backup and motion alerts sent to my phone. The whole setup cost me $900, which stung, but felt necessary. The tires cost another $800 to replace since I needed a matching set. Almost $2,000 in one day because Brenda couldn't handle losing. That night, lying in bed, I started seriously considering just selling my house and moving. It would be admitting defeat, but at least I'd have peace. I could find another neighborhood without a psychotic HOA president, start fresh somewhere else, but the thought of Brenda winning, of her getting to push me out of my own home, made my blood boil. I'd lived here for 5 years. I'd built my business here. I had friends here. Why should I be the one to leave? I was still debating it the next morning when my phone lit up with motion alerts. All 6 cameras at once. I pulled up the feed to find 3 police cars in front of Brenda's house. I threw on clothes and walked down the street where a small crowd was already gathering. Mike was there, filming on his phone. "What's happening?" I asked, not sure. "Cops showed up about 20 minutes ago and went inside. Haven't come out since." We didn't have to wait long. The front door opened and 2 officers emerged with Brenda between them. Her hands were cuffed behind her back. The crowd went dead silent. Officer Martinez was one of the cops. He saw me and gave a small nod but didn't say anything. They put Brenda in the back of one of the cruisers and drove away. Another officer stayed behind and started talking to Brenda's husband, Gerald, who looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. The crowd buzzed with speculation. Someone said they heard it was about fraud. Someone else thought it might be assault. A third person insisted it was identity theft. Nobody knew anything for sure, but everyone had theories. I went home and spent the day obsessively checking local news websites. Nothing appeared until that evening when a brief article popped up on the Colorado Springs Gazette website. Local HOA president arrested on embezzlement charges. The article was short and light on details, but the basics were there. Brenda Carmichael had been arrested for allegedly embezzling over $40,000 from the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association over a 2-year period. An anonymous tip had led to an investigation which uncovered falsified expense reports, phantom vendor contracts, and direct transfers of HOA funds to Brenda's personal accounts. I sat back in my chair, stunned. $40,000. That was real money. Serious crime money. My phone rang. "Dorothy, did you see the news?" she asked. "Just read it. Is it true?" "I think so. Richard and I requested a financial audit last week after the pattern of vindictive fines came to light. We wanted to see if there were other irregularities. The auditor found some things that didn't add up and reported them to the police. They moved faster than I expected." $40,000, I said. "That's insane." She was billing the HOA for landscaping services that never happened, snow removal from a company that doesn't exist, legal fees for lawyers she never hired. It was systematic and deliberate. How did nobody notice? She was the president, and she controlled who saw the financial reports. Carol and Janet rubber-stamped whatever she put in front of them. Richard and I never got the detailed statements until we specifically demanded them. I thought about all those fines she'd issued, all that righteous indignation about community standards and rules and respect. She'd been stealing from everyone the entire time. "What happens now?" I asked. "The board will meet tomorrow to appoint an interim president and figure out next steps. The lawyer says we'll probably get some of the money back eventually, but it depends on Brenda's assets and how her case goes. Criminal court first, then civil recovery." "Who's going to be interim president?" Dorothy laughed. "Richard and I are drawing straws. Nobody wants the job after this disaster." The next month was surreal. Brenda's arrest became the talk of not just Meadowbrook Heights, but the wider Colorado Springs area. Local news ran stories about HOA corruption and interviewed residents about their experiences. I declined all interview requests, but several of my neighbors didn't, and suddenly everyone knew about the retaliatory fines and destroyed mailboxes and slashed tires. The police found evidence linking Brenda to my tires, by the way. Security footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera. 2 houses down caught her car driving past my house at 3 a.m. the night it happened. Combined with a receipt from a hardware store for a utility knife purchased the day before, it was enough to add vandalism and property destruction charges to her embezzlement case. The mailbox thing never got officially resolved. Without direct evidence, Martinez said the department wasn't pursuing charges against anyone for that incident. I think he knew it was me, but he also knew Brenda had done worse, and he was choosing his battles. Dorothy ended up as interim president and immediately started implementing reforms. Financial transparency. Required board approval for any expenditure over $500, an independent management company to handle administrative tasks. Term limits for board positions. The mood in the neighborhood shifted. People were angry about the stolen money, but there was also a weird sense of relief. Like everyone had been holding their breath for 2 years and could finally exhale. I ran into Gerald one day at the grocery store. He looked exhausted. "I'm sorry about your truck tires," he said quietly. I didn't know she'd done it until the police told me. "It's not your fault. She's not well, Ethan. I've been trying to get her to see someone about her stress and anxiety for years, but she wouldn't listen. She just got more and more controlling about everything." "That doesn't excuse stealing $40,000. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. I'm divorcing her. I can't do this anymore." He walked away with his shopping cart, shoulders hunched. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. The spring weather arrived in March, melting the last of the snow. Brenda's trial was scheduled for June, and the prosecution seemed confident they had a solid case. The HOA's lawyer said we'd likely recover about 60% of the stolen funds through asset seizure and repayment plans, which was better than nothing. I kept running my business. My client list actually grew after all the publicity, weirdly enough. People who heard the story seemed to appreciate that I'd stood up to an abusive HOA president, even if my methods had been questionable. Big Blue got a full tune-up and ran better than ever. I parked her in my driveway again, and nobody said a word. In April, I got a letter from the HOA. For a second, my stomach dropped, thinking it was another fine. But it was actually an apology. An official, board-approved apology for the harassment and wrongful fines. They'd also voted to reimburse me for all the costs I'd incurred because of Brenda's actions, including the tire replacement and security system. The check was for $3,000. I called Dorothy to thank her. "It's what you deserve," she said. And honestly, after everything she stole, $3,000 is nothing. The legal settlement will probably cost the HOA 10 times that much in the end. But Richard and I felt like making sure individuals she hurt got made whole was important. I appreciate it more than I can say. "Just promise me that if you ever have an issue with the HOA again, you'll come talk to us instead of burying more mailboxes." I laughed. "Deal. Though for the record, I never admitted to burying that mailbox." "Sure you didn't. Have a good day, Ethan." Brenda's trial happened in June like scheduled. I didn't attend most of it, but I went to the sentencing hearing in August. The courtroom was packed with Meadowbrook Heights residents, all wanting to see the conclusion of the drama that had consumed our neighborhood. The judge sentenced Brenda to 4 years in prison for embezzlement and ordered her to repay the full $40,000 plus interest and penalties. With the vandalism charges for my tires, she got an additional 6 months, 4.5 years total. She stood there in her orange jumpsuit, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. No designer clothes, no makeup, no authority, just a middle-aged woman who'd let power go to her head and made catastrophically bad choices. I didn't feel triumphant watching her get sentenced. I didn't feel happy. Mostly, I just felt tired and ready for it all to be over. Gerald filed for divorce while she was awaiting sentencing. I heard he moved to Denver to stay with family. Life in Meadowbrook Heights slowly returned to normal. Dorothy served as president for a year before stepping down and letting someone younger take over. The new president, a guy named Tom Chen who worked as an accountant, ran things efficiently and fairly. No drama, no power trips, just boring administrative work. It was exactly what we needed. I still do snow removal every winter. Commercial lots mostly, but a few residential clients too. I charge fair rates and do good work, and my business continues to grow. Sometimes I drive past where Brenda used to live. New owners bought the house in the fall, a young couple with a baby. They put up a new mailbox, a simple standard issue thing from Home Depot. No fancy copper roof or decorative shutters. I wonder sometimes if I handled everything the right way. If I should have been more patient, more mature, less petty about the mailbox. If maybe I let my anger control me when I should have taken the high road. But then, I remember standing in my driveway with Brenda screaming at me, demanding free labor and threatening my livelihood if I didn't comply. I remember the fines based on lies, the tire slashing, the constant harassment. And I think maybe the mailbox was exactly the right response, not because it was mature or high-minded or noble, but because sometimes people like Brenda only understand consequences. Sometimes you can't reason with bullies. Sometimes you have to show them that you won't be pushed around, even if it costs you. The mailbox became a symbol, not of my worst impulse, but of my refusal to be a victim. It was childish and petty and probably wrong on a dozen different levels. But it was also the moment I stopped letting Brenda control my life. She was the one who escalated to property destruction and embezzlement. She was the one who let her need for control consume her completely. I just buried a mailbox. Okay, I also caused the whole thing by refusing free work and standing up to her in the first place. But I don't regret that part. The September HOA meeting focused on budget planning for the following year. I attended because I'd actually started caring about neighborhood governance after everything that happened. Tom Chen presented reasonable proposals for street maintenance and common area landscaping. We voted to approve everything without drama. On my way out, Mike caught up with me. "Hey, you hear the news about Brenda? She's trying to appeal the sentence." "Good luck with that," I said. "She's guilty as hell." That's what her lawyer said. Apparently she's not handling prison well. Not my problem anymore. We walked to our cars together. The evening was cool and pleasant, with the mountains visible in the distance under a clear sky. It was the kind of night that reminded me why I'd moved to Colorado in the first place. "You think she learned anything from all this?" Mike asked. "Probably not," I said. "People like Brenda rarely do." "That's depressing." "Maybe, but I learned something." "What's that?" "That standing up for yourself matters even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I spent too many years avoiding conflict and trying to keep the peace with people who didn't deserve it. I'm done with that." Mike grinned. "I'm glad you buried her mailbox." I didn't admit to that. Sure, my mistake. I'm glad someone mysteriously buried her mailbox in a completely unrelated incident that had nothing to do with you. I laughed and climbed into my truck. Driving home through Meadowbrook Heights, I noticed improvements everywhere. Fresh paint on the clubhouse, new playground equipment in the common area, flower beds that actually had flowers in them. Tom Chen was doing a good job. The HOA was functioning like it was supposed to, maintaining the neighborhood instead of serving as a power trip for whoever was in charge. My house looked good when I pulled into the driveway. I'd painted the shutters in the spring and redone the front landscaping. Everything was up to code and then some. Not because I was afraid of fines, but because I actually cared about how my property looked. The difference mattered. Inside, I made dinner and caught up on emails. A new client wanted a quote for commercial snow removal on 3 properties. Another needed help with a landscape installation project, Business was good, better than good, actually. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Ethan Bradley, the guy from the HOA case?" I hesitated before responding. "Who's asking?" "My name is Jennifer Wallace. I'm dealing with a nightmare HOA situation in my neighborhood, and someone said you might be willing to talk to me about it." I stared at the message for a long moment. Part of me wanted to ignore it. I'd had enough HOA drama to last a lifetime. I'd earned the right to just live my life and run my business in peace. But I remembered how alone I'd felt when Brenda was coming after me. How grateful I'd been for Dorothy and Richard speaking up, for Mike offering support, for Officer Martinez treating me like a human being instead of a criminal. I typed back, "Sure." "What's going on?" Jennifer's story spilled out in a series of texts. An HOA president who was threatening foreclosure over minor violations, questionable fines, selective enforcement. The same pattern I'd experienced, playing out in a different neighborhood. "You have documentation?" I asked. "Photos and copies of all the letters. My husband thinks I'm overreacting, but I know this isn't normal." "It's not normal. You need to request a hearing with the full board and present evidence of selective enforcement. Also check if your HOA is registered properly with the state and following their own bylaws. A lot of them aren't." "How do I do that?" I spent the next 20 minutes walking her through the same process I'd followed. The research, the documentation, the strategic approach to fighting back. "Thank you so much," she wrote finally. "I was starting to think I was going crazy." "You're not crazy. These people abuse their authority because they can, but they hate it when you know the rules as well as they do. Make them follow their own procedures." "Did your HOA president ever back down?" "She got arrested for embezzlement," I typed. "So it didn't come up." There was a long pause. Then, seriously. Sometimes the people who are loudest about rules are breaking the biggest ones." After Jennifer thanked me again and signed off, I sat there thinking about how many other people were probably dealing with similar situations right now. How many Brendas were out there, using HOA positions to bully and control their neighbors. I opened my laptop and started typing. Not a legal document or a complaint, just a blog post about my experience. Everything that had happened, from the snow removal demand to the trial. The mistakes I'd made. The things I'd learned. The strategies that worked. I titled it, "How to Fight Back Against an Abusive HOA President," and posted it on a new website I created called survivinghoas.com. Then I went to bed, not expecting much to come from it. Within a week, the post had been viewed 10,000 times. People were emailing me with their own stories. Someone shared it on Reddit and it went viral. Local news called asking for interviews, which I declined, but the attention kept building. I started getting consulting requests. People wanted to pay me to help them fight their HOAs. I wasn't a lawyer, so I couldn't give legal advice, but I could share my experience and help people document their cases. It became a side business. Not huge money, but enough to matter. More importantly, it felt meaningful. I was helping people who were in the same position I'd been in, feeling powerless against an organization that was supposed to serve them. By November, I'd helped about 30 different people with their HOA disputes. Most cases settled without needing lawyers once the HOA boards realized the homeowners knew their rights. A few escalated to legal action, and I connected those people with attorneys who specialized in HOA law. One case in Denver turned out to involve embezzlement, just like Brenda. The HOA president had been stealing assessments for 3 years. My blog post had given a homeowner the idea to request a financial audit, which uncovered the fraud. That president got 5 years. I thought about Brenda sometimes, sitting in prison, probably still convinced she'd done nothing wrong, still blaming me for standing up to her, still believing she was the victim. Maybe she'd learn something eventually. Maybe she wouldn't. Either way, she wasn't my problem anymore. Christmas came and the neighborhood looked beautiful. Lights everywhere, all within the HOA guidelines, but nobody stressed about it. Tom Chen had taken a light touch to enforcement, focusing on actual problems rather than petty violations. I put up lights on my house and a wreath on my door. Big Blue sat in my driveway, ready for the next snowstorm. My security cameras kept watch, though I didn't expect to need them anymore. On Christmas Eve, Dorothy knocked on my door with a plate of cookies. "Merry Christmas," she said. "I made too many and thought you might want some." "That's really kind. Thank you. I also wanted to say thanks for everything you did this year. I know it wasn't easy standing up to Brenda, and you paid a price for it. But you helped expose something that needed to be exposed. The neighborhood is better because you didn't back down." "I mostly just buried a mailbox and got lucky that she turned out to be a criminal," Dorothy laughed. "However it happened, I'm glad it did. Enjoy the cookies." She left and I ate 3 cookies while watching snow start to fall outside. Big, fat flakes that promised a white Christmas. My phone buzzed. Another message from someone dealing with an HOA nightmare. I read through their situation and started typing advice, feeling that same sense of purpose I'd discovered when I helped Jennifer. Maybe burying Brenda's mailbox hadn't been my finest moment. Maybe I'd let anger guide me when I should have stayed calm. Maybe there were 100 better ways I could have handled the situation. But it had worked. Not because revenge was right, but because it was the catalyst that exposed the truth. My refusal to be a victim forced Brenda to escalate, which led to her getting caught. Sometimes the only way through is to stop being reasonable with unreasonable people. I finished my response and hit send, then grabbed another cookie and watched the snow fall. Business was good. The neighborhood was good. Life was good. And somewhere in a Colorado prison, Brenda was learning that actions have consequences. I could live with that. The snow kept falling, covering everything in white. Tomorrow I'd fire up Big Blue and clear driveways for clients, making good money doing honest work. The cycle would continue. Winter to spring to summer to fall and back again. But this time I'd do it on my terms, standing up for myself and helping others do the same. It wasn't the ending I'd expected when Brenda first demanded I clear her driveway. But it was the ending I'd earned, and that made all the difference.